Of course, yeah, because that's the American dream, right? It's like, oh, you'll go out, you'll make it big, and then you'll buy a 9-bedroom home or something. And it's like the arts in this country are systemically under-supported, period. So it's a tricky job. There are easier jobs to have 100% of the time. And I just wish we gave people that information.
Today on the Video Creator Podcast, we have Graham Ehlers Sheldon on, and he is a director, a producer, a cinematographer, and even a writer for some different things. I'm so excited to share this with you as we talk through a bunch of fun different topics about how he got to where he is in his career, even dabbled a little bit in AI and the strike in Hollywood. So let's jump right in. It'd be great if you can just tell us your name, a little bit about what you do, and how essentially you got into the world of video production.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. My name is Graham Ehlers Sheldon. I'm a producer, director of photography, and director. Some combination of any of those various hyphens occurs on most of the shows that I work on, most of the projects, but you know, it was sort of a family business. My father is a producer and writer, and so I grew up being sort of in and around the entertainment industry and understanding it was absolutely a valid profession to have. And, you know, I wasn't forced into one of those sort of stock, you know, safety professions, if you will. I graduated from school, went to a open Craigslist call for a hosting job, and got that job. And sort of the rest is history. I'm not a host. You'll notice I didn't say host as one of the particular jobs that I identify most with. But you know, I was a theater major, I was a film major, and so I kind of never forgot, you know, the theater part of it.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that school side. Where did you go? And you said a theater major. Like, did that always lead into knowing you wanted to be in the world of video production, Hollywood? Or yeah, how did you kind of choose the school and how did that help you on your career path?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, school, specifically college, university, was a little bit of I don't know, maybe a teenage rebellion moment, because I had most of my life grown up in California. And then I went to Indiana University, which seems maybe a little far afield from California, to study and to, you know, I had that typical like teenage hubris where I'm like, I think I know everything going in, you know, pre-freshman year or whatever.
Right.
and really, I think it just gave me kind of a place to fail and to mess up and to make mistakes in sort of a low risk environment. But yeah, I went to Indiana University and met a lot of people that I still work with today in various capacities. I mean, that was sort of the biggest takeaway for me out of school was that network of people. I mean, I like to say that I learned maybe 5% of what I know now on, you know, in terms of my skill set related to production from Indiana University. So that isn't a high percentage, and I don't think that's a reflection on the school necessarily. I just don't think anything replaces actually being on set and actually doing the work for gaining knowledge quickly.
You did that, and then directly after is when you went for that Craigslist call?
Yeah, like 3 months. I think my first job out of IU, Indiana University, was standing outside of Target in Mission Valley with one of those clipboards and bugging people for money for various causes. And that's the technical term for that is a canvasser. I was a canvasser immediately out of school.
Do you feel like, now you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. What year was this when you?
Yeah, I graduated in 2009. Okay. So sort of famous for being right around, you know, the
right after the crash.
If you've seen Get Short, that's all happened right.
Yeah. I was right before that. So I got to experience the whole thing too.
Yeah, huge crash. No one was like, oh, let's hire now.
From 2009 to where we are in 2023, if you were starting where you were then, before college, do you think you would have gone the same path of going to college and then kind of moving from there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I met my wife and business partner at that college. So for me, that kind of answers the question right there. Of course, I would have gone again, knowing what I know now. But I mean, there is a absolute argument to be had. Like, is film school, quote unquote, worth it? Is traditional film school the path that everyone should take? And I'm a little bit on the fence about that. I think one of the things that academia, sort of writ large, gets wrong is they say, "Oh, yes, you can be Stanley Kubrick, Quentin Tarantino, pick your favorite director, and fill in there." And they kind of, but the honest answer is some tiny percentage of a given class is going to, quote unquote, do this professionally. And I think that I wish in school more teachers were like, "Hey, I don't think this is the thing for you," honestly. Because I think we send too many young kids out there with a false perception that, oh, really try hard at this for 2 months and you'll, quote, make it.
Right.
And that's sort of the biggest problem I have with our film school university system is the percentages of people who actually do this professionally is so incredibly tiny. Most people tend to move off in some sort of related field around, marketing or content creation or something that doesn't even involve a camera. And that's fine, but we need to set people up with a realistic expectation of what their future looks like at these schools,
Yeah.
especially if you're paying $100,000 or whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think we all have rosy glasses of what our future can be. And sometimes if it's not steered in the right direction, that leads to some unfortunate path.
Of course. Yeah, because that's the American dream, right? It's like, oh, you'll go out, you'll make it big, and then you'll buy a 9-bedroom home or something. And it's like the arts in this country are systemically undersupported, period. So it's a tricky job. There are easier jobs to have 100% of the time. And I just wish we gave people that information.
Yeah. So for you, since you have all these different roles from producer, director, DP, and even writing, correct?
I do write a lot of technical articles for cined.com. Shout out to those guys. And I do a lot of creative work as a writer. My father being a writer, my wife being a better writer than me, and having worked with many other writers, I don't identify as being a writer. It's just I've worked with too many just genius people in that space that I write a lot, but I don't think of myself.
Dabble.
I dabble. Yeah.
Just one last question about the college experience. Would you say which of those roles that you now play do you feel like college best equipped you for or gave you the most skill sets to be proficient in?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a specific role. It was more like a mindset. And it's the mindset that, okay, I'll just create content, I'll just make stuff, and then eventually I'll figure out the rest. So it gave me that mindset to just be rolling on something. And then eventually I'll figure out how to parlay that into some kind of career. So I think there's something to the idea that the more you're just hitting record on a camera and making a thing, there's some real value in that because what is the saying, like 10,000 hours or something makes you a master, right? It's like just do the thing as much as you can, mess up in low stakes situations so that you don't mess up in high stakes situations. So more that mindset.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. When we had Madison on, he was talking about for creatives, sometimes being put in a situation like school where you have these hard deadlines rather than just trying to go out and be creative really allows you to be pushed into a situation before it's a client where you have to get stuff done and learn to work under those timelines before it ends up being costly if you don't hit those timelines.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you referenced a mutual friend, Madison Dyer. So that's actually, for folks at home, one of the reasons I'm here. And I met you, and Madison is an amazing DP based out of San Diego. So anyway, I'm glad he introduced us.
Yeah, me as well. So you jumped in and you were doing a hosting role. When did you start really getting into the DP, the director of photography side, and actually filming?
I didn't have the budget initially to have a B cam for some of the projects that I was, quote unquote, hosting, like travel content, New York Fashion Week. Actually, I did some hosting there on camera stuff. But I never had the budget for B cam, and I'd always liked cameras and I liked that technology. So I picked up a B cam. I picked up another camera body, and I would do my host stand up. And while A cam was off doing something else, I would get B roll somewhere else. and then just loved that, as some of us do. And then eventually started getting sort of camera operator jobs, and then felt comfortable enough to tell people I was a director of photography after just dozens and dozens of credits or whatever in that space. And then, so some people know me only as, director of photography. Some people know me only as a producer, but I think it's the people that are comfortable with sort of that multi-hyphenate role. And those are the jobs that I enjoy working on the most. But yeah, it was a budget thing. I just wanted more shots of a thing, and I couldn't get it unless I picked up a camera.
Do you remember what camera that was?
Oh my gosh. It probably was like a early Sony body, or like a GL2 Canon something. I did do like Canon XL2. I mean, this is like right after or right during mini DV.
Okay.
So I don't know. That dates me a little bit, but
yeah. Okay. Nice.
And a Panasonic 3D A1, which is a camera I guarantee nobody knows about, but it was a integrated 3D camera I shot with a little bit in like 09, 10. So it's one of those cameras where you set the convergence for filming 3D. Yeah, with two different eyes. So anyway, Google that camera. It's this weird looking thing. Looks straight out of WALL-E, the Pixar film.
So you had some of that technology, what you do now with your YouTube channel and stuff. You enjoyed the technology side early on then.
Yeah, I always loved the, matte black classic film tool. I've always sort of loved that, and I've always loved the technology of it. And I feel like sometimes we get too caught up in the technology and we forget that this is primarily a storytelling medium. So I'm always very wary of that. But you referenced Cine D, it isn't necessarily my YouTube channel. I'm one of, I don't know, 4 or 5 on-camera people. But I've just been with Cine D for like 7 or so years. And I'm sort of the American, quote unquote, on the team who's based in sort of traditional Southern California film production. So I fill in that role, but the team is in Austria, Japan, a bunch of places actually. But yeah, quite a multinational group for Cine D.
So I feel like that's a good segue into talking a little bit about that. How did you end up getting into that in the first place? Were you creating your own YouTube videos? How did you get connected with Cine D? And it's 140 plus thousand subscribers now, so it's a substantial channel. How did you get into it, and how has it gotten to that point?
Thank you for mentioning the subscriber numbers. I think that's like, okay, that's a healthy YouTube channel for sure. But I think in the cinema space, where we're even smaller group, I think that's especially healthy because we speak to a very, tiny segment of society that doesn't want to, I'm holding up my phone now, visual medium, it doesn't want to be filming only on their phones, So it was in my late 20s. I had been working professionally for a couple years at that point, and I was working on my first film as producer and I also second unit DP that called The Good Catholic, sort of this romantic comedy set in a Catholic church that ended up selling to Netflix actually. And so I just randomly, I guess, emailed Nino, one of the partners at Cine D, hey, I'm in America, blah, blah, blah. Should we write together? And then my first movie came out at the same time, and 6 or 7 movies later, and a bunch of just sort of classic network television projects, I've just always written for Cine D because I like it. And I like the community of people that is at NAB and is at Cine Gear and some of those classic trade shows. And I like that community. Absolutely. So yeah, that's how I was involved. I think I reached out, I don't remember, an email, something.
Yeah. And you do videos, is it like monthly on their channel? Is it like a specific rhythm, or is it just as opportunities come up for you?
Yeah, I mean, we each have our individual specialties. For a while, I have been sort of the lighting guy, just because I think LED lighting especially has been sort of fascinating. And from a year-to-year basis, the rollout of new products is approaching almost like camera bodies. Like every 2 years, we have this light that we 100% need, right? Sort of reviewing lighting projects or products. And then I've been also like various events, especially in Southern California. I've been going to those ASC Clubhouse events. I've been sort of covering that stuff. And, I'm getting as much value out of it as I hope viewers are getting value out of it, because I want to be learning what the latest tool is, because almost always I'm trying to incorporate that instantly into whatever kind of show that I'm working on at the time. It's about making cool YouTube content and also getting a front row seat to the latest gadget and then incorporating that instantly. So, and then in terms of the cadence of video rollouts, I mean, it sort of varies about how much bandwidth I have. I think my colleagues at CineD would like me to do more, and I would like to do more, but it's like whatever I can manage with current production schedule, basically.
Yeah.
So I don't know, usually like 2 to 3 a month on a good month, you'll see my face on CineD talking about something.
Yeah, yeah. And so in our first conversation before this podcast, you mentioned that you've been able to become a brand ambassador for a few different brands, including Sigma, I believe Small HD.
Roscoe. Yeah, a few brands. Mm-hmm.
So how did that
Innovative,
come about?
The carts, if you
Yeah.
Innovative, yeah.
How did that come about, and what does that look like for your career?
It seems to me to be an extension of sort of reviewing products and talking about products and being a communicator around technology in the film and television space. Like everybody, you run into people, usually in the marketing departments at these various companies, that you really connect with, or you're really on board with some part of their vision, or the product is just incredible. In the case of Innovative, especially, they're kind of like the segment leader in camera carts. It's like, I never want to play with any other camera cart, for example, with those guys. It just, I'll help with R&D or product launches. It varies, taking X gadget into the Alps and trying to break it, in the case of a particular tripod, that sort of stuff. And I don't, in terms of like value to career, it's a little unsure, like a lot of things in marketing. We call them KPIs, like key performance indicators, right? As a marketing term of art, where we're like, how much of this is actually leading to selling of a product? And I just don't look at it like that. I think it gives me a role, a seat at the table, so to speak, to be able to innovate on an upcoming product that I'm going to need to use immediately. And that sometimes, although I love all of those engineers, they're sometimes kind of living a cubicle-centric life with blueprints and CAD drawings, and they're not, exposing it to some level of salt water or whatever. It just makes my job on set easier for me to be able to give input to some of the various brands that you mentioned.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And do you remember which was your first?
It was Sigma. Yeah, Sigma USA. So Sigma Corporation of America. They're based out of New York, but there's a new office in Burbank. Newish now. It's been a couple years at this point, but I don't count those pandemic years. And actually, Aubrey Duclos, you might recognize that last name, Duclos, Matthew Duclos's partner. I invited Aubrey to come to the premiere of The Good Catholic, because I was a fan of Sigma Glass at the time. And then there you go. Sort of the rest is history. And I've been a Sigma ambassador now for, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, something like that. So that's a company, family-owned business. It's very near and dear to my heart. And I mean, the attention that they have to their optics is just absolutely incredible. So yeah, I think it started with Sigma.
Okay. Yeah, Sigma was a big part of my journey in photography and video. Not working directly with the company, but when they developed the art glass.
Yeah, like 2012. Yeah.
And, at that point I was shooting mainly Canon L series, but all those lenses were so expensive. And then I had the 50 millimeter 1.4 art. Mm-hmm. And I used that up until it was stolen.
No.
Literally this year in February. I used that as my primary lens in cinematography, in photography. I just loved it. And so it's a good brand for you to be partnered with.
100%. Yeah. With the art lens sort of revolution, that's when I really started noticing, Sigma as a little more than kind of that, third party lens company that you'd kind of heard of. And yeah, I picked up like a 24 to 105 zoom, and it was like almost parfocal. I was like, how is that? You know what I mean?
For sure. It just shouldn't be.
It just shouldn't be. And you would turn a lot of the zooms at the time, you would kind of turn them so that they would face down and they would extend.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
just
that kind
gravity.
Of stuff, just annoying, just from gravity, that kind of annoying stuff. And it wasn't happening with this art lens. I'm like, this feels incredible. Yeah. Anyway, so.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I always, especially for people that we interview who are part of the filming side of things, gear is always a big topic. Just understanding people's perspective of gear. So I got a couple questions for you. The first question is, where are you on the spectrum of how important gear is to the actual product?
You know, without putting a like exact percentage on it, I mean, look, I've shot stuff on my iPhone and it's just been the lighting really that's kind of carried that. I mean, the iPhone has a fine camera sensor, but lighting is really where it's at. I think if you're going to invest and look at one specific category, you can make cameras from 5-6 years ago look just absolutely incredible with just great lighting, because like the dynamic range doesn't matter as much if you're kind of nailing that lighting ratio in cameras, so to speak. I don't know. The biggest change for me in terms of technology as it relates to my creativity is camera bodies get smaller. Even like Sony Venice in the case of the Rialto extensions, I'm a big believer in like making it an ease of use thing for the operator, because I think we're all more creative if we're not exhausted, drenched in sweat, and our back hurts. You know what I mean? So as things kind of get smaller and more compact, I'm constantly trying to push things that way if I can, whether it's adding like a flex attachment to a Ronin 4D or the Rialto in the case of the Sony Venice. It's like smaller is usually better, because if you are looking at an angle that might be the best angle for a particular shot, but you know the physical pain required to execute that, you may not do that shot. And that isn't in service of the story. That's in service of your health, which is important. But I really don't want that to factor in. And I think the dirty truth of it is most modern camera bodies can be matched to look very close to one another. I'm talking about like the latest Canon C series, the latest Sony Cine series, all of that stuff. You can match it all to look very similar. Even Panasonic with the VariCam. So I think that's the dirty little secret. So if you know that, if you know you can match all of these various camera systems to look pretty similar, then just focus on your story and pick a camera body that's ergonomic for you.
Yeah.
Anyway, sort of a long answer, but that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah. No, I think that's super helpful to know. Just your perspective on that. And then on the actual camera side, what is your go-to camera right now? The camera that day in and day out you take out to go film with? And what is the camera that if you could buy any camera that you would be using?
Oh, like an aspirational purchase?
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be aspirational. Like, obviously technology continues to move and move. And you've mentioned even the Ronin 4D, this the chicken bobblehead camera.
It gets kind of a bad rap because it looks a little funny, but I love that camera. Yes. Okay, so I'll break that down into my like everyday street photography carry around camera would be like a Sigma FPL. The medium format favorite, and I have an FPL. I have a Fujifilm GFX 100S. That's my favorite like medium format. In terms of like a bigger bodied cinema camera, I really like the Canon C500 Mark II actually. If I need more battery life because or I need Super 35 format for some reason, I'll do a C300 Mark III. I mean, the Alexa Mini has been a workhorse for years and years and years. I'm a little done with CFast as a card format. So if we can keep moving to CF Express or internal SSDs or some kind of thing like that. I just got a FreeFly Ember high-speed camera, which I guess I'll put in the aspirational category because I have like 20 minutes of time spent on that camera. So I'll report back, but that's the thing I'm like most excited to try out would be FreeFly Ember currently.
Of those different cameras, so that was quite a few different ones. Is there like something that's not in the market yet that you're just waiting for?
Well, without violating any like NDAs or anything. Well, it's so I mean, we all want the same stuff, right? We want like insane 18 stops of dynamic range. And with some of the Alexa stuff, it's getting like 15. Some of the red stuff is getting like 14, 15, and that's marketing speak, but like actual, tested dynamic range. But I want to be a little careful with that because if we get into this future filled with like high dynamic range all the time capable cameras, that's going to make us not as good at lighting and kind of the fundamentals. If you can just point a camera at a scene and it looks fantastic through like some sort of programmatic AI input something, you're still going to, I want to keep us in a space where we're still making creative decisions in the field that influence a story and not framing a wide 8K shot and figuring out everything else in post. Because there's been examples of that, and I get a little worried that's the future that we're headed towards. I mean, look, we're in the golden age of sort of cinema technology, including lighting, including cameras, including optics. We have access to anamorphic primes for like $8,000, even less in the case of some of these other Chinese brands. It's a golden age of being able to shoot spherical, anamorphic, high dynamic range. And it's just easier and easier to get started in this business. But because it is so easy to get started in this business now from a technology perspective, we all need to be careful that all of our stuff doesn't look similar. Remember, a few years ago, like Game of Thrones classically, where like everything should be dark. And I remember filming a commercial for like an artificial turf company back at the time. And it was like a little too moody. You know what I mean? Because I had just seen whatever episode of Game of Thrones. I'm like, yeah, I want, shadows everywhere. So that's just an example for me where I saw something that was quote of the moment and it snuck its way into my own work. So I just want us to all be very cognizant, because if all of our work starts looking very same, we're doing something wrong. Not everything requires a gimbal. Not everything requires a dramatic zoom or a dolly push or drones. Not everything requires drones. So let's just kind of keep a focus on that and not get carried away, where all of our stuff looks the same.
Yeah.
And that's the death of our medium,
That's a really good point. Yeah. If we get into the too much hyper real, the over high dynamic range and stuff,
it looks cartoony. It doesn't look real. There's a reason we've for the most part stuck with 23:9:8 as our frames of choice, so to speak. It's because that's classic cinema. We're used to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I remember in photography when people first started doing compositing, they were really starting to do those HDR photos, the compositing, and I started to lean into it a little bit, and I realized like some of it looks great. Like when you're photographing a waterfall and you want to have the water smooth, you throw this super dark ND on it, and then you're compositing that with filling out like what the trees are on the sides. Like some of that works nice, but all of a sudden everything was hyper real.
Mm-hmm.
And photography wasn't as enjoyable to look at. Whereas, I think there's a balance that we need to find. And I think to your point about AI, we're getting in a interesting space where we need to process the ethics of AI, not just ethically as a whole, but the ethics of showing a bunch of fake imagery to people and not allowing them to actually experience real, and what impact that's going to have on society. We don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole, but that's something that
that's a whole episode all by itself. Yeah.
Just last weekend, my wife, kids, and I went to Yosemite for the first time.
For the first time?
For the first time ever, even growing up here.
I love Yosemite.
And it was incredible. But as I was doing some photography, I only had a 50 millimeter with me. And so I decided to do some bracketing, and I shot like 30 frames for a single landscape. And as you start getting in there, it's easy to just want to go like, man, that tree is dead in the middle. Like, I want to remove that. And I just started dealing with my own internal ethics on what makes a good image. Is it perfection, or is it reality, or is it some combination of the two? Even in that when I was creating those stitching, it's like, oh man, I could have got a few more images of the sky for this corner. And so I don't feel too bad about doing generative AI to
For
fill
a little
a little bit of
cloud.
cloud
Yeah,
and sky.
that seems valid.
But when you get to the rock, in the actual rock side of Yosemite, whether it be
you're going to change
Half Dome-
El Cap to look different. I mean, people are going to be like, huh?
And that's where it gets interesting.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think real quick on AI, I like it's coming whether we want it or not. We have to sort of embrace it. There are all of the ethical questions that you're bringing up. I mean, for me, I'm using it as like a previs tool for pitches. You know, I'm like, the drone is FPV. It goes past the hot air balloon, follows the skydiver into the lake in one continuous shot that we speed up during the journey down. You know, I'll AI the heck out of that sequence because that's a tricky one to explain. I'm still going to end up shooting it though. So for previs, that sounds right. But you touch on a concept that's, you know, popular out of mostly video games actually, called uncanny valley. And it's the idea that something looks fake and unreal, or there's something off when you look at an android character, right? There's something just a little bit different about whoever in the Alien movie, right? Bishop, I think his name is. You know, consumers can feel that, but at the same time, we've been manipulating and photoshopping the heck out of stuff for decades and decades and decades. So it's going to be everybody's own particular journey with AI. I don't think it's going to kill, at least in the field production side of things, as many jobs as we think, because you need someone to put the prompts in, and you need somebody to know, oh, maybe there should be a puffy cloud in the upper right of my Yosemite shot. So it still requires somebody thinking about that. I look at it a little like a cinematographer in video games, for example. In video games, you might be using Maya or some other Unreal. You're still picking camera placement. You're even still picking a focal length, and you're still picking where all the lights go. That doesn't feel like cheating to me the few times I've worked in video games. The same thing. Look at it as another tool. I'm talking specifically about film and television because, there's other way sketchier parts of the dark web where you can use AI for ill.
Yes, let's avoid those.
Yeah, I'm going to stick clear of that.
So I've kind of leaned most of this conversation so far around the filming side. As someone myself who hasn't worked much in the world of producing, one, how did you start doing that? And two, what does a good producing job look like for you? What are you excited about?
Yeah, well, I would, push back a little bit, Greg, on the idea that you haven't done a lot of producing. I think having a production company, you're doing somewhat of the role. You're executing a project, you're making it happen, right? So you're wearing many of the hats that a producer already wears. So I think a good producer is allowing the creatives, quote unquote, to do their best work, empowering your director of photography. And I look at, budgets as a storytelling document because it shows where your priorities are. And when I see a budget, if it's like hand-rolled sushi on set, I'm trying to think of some other ones, like rental sports car for X A-list actor. It's like, yes, I want my crew to be comfortable, but ultimately we're trying to put something on screen that we can be proud of because these projects take sometimes years in the case of feature films. Let's have that in the back of our head and make that a worthwhile 1 to 3 years of our lives to make X feature film. So, I mean, my father is a producer, but he came out through television, right? So in television, classically, you're a writer in the writer's room, and then you kind of move to the producer job out of writing. And back in the 80s and 90s, when he was working like Star Trek Next Gen and Charlie's Angels and these classic shows, that was almost what like showrunners are doing now. Showrunning wasn't as much of a thing back then as it is now. In television, entirely different. Like producers on X procedural show may never be looking at a budget, but they're still thinking about how to execute, X, and tying that all together. Like, is this waterfall sequence worth spending this much of our budget on this, or should we be doing something else? And then it comes back to developing the budget or the project from nothing too. So I'm involved in development on a lot of the projects I work on. You could hire me that way, or you could be like, I've been brought in a lot to like fix a thing. we went down some route that we are not cool with anymore. Can you please help us out? I've been fired, or I've been hired that way, and other people have been fired as a result, unfortunately. So it's been, quite a rocky road as a producer. I'm a member of the Producers Guild of America Motion Picture Council. And we tried to, not me so much, but a bunch of great committees within the PGA tried to make the role of producing to be the job of being a creative producer, to being on set, to executing a specific project, and not being quote unquote the money. You know what I mean? So that also, and making those titles be more like executive producer, co-producer, and protecting the job title of producer to be the person who's actually in movie magic budgeting or whatever your favorite software is, doing the real job of producing. So, it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I develop it, I make it, and then I try to make sure it has a smooth launch onto whatever platform. I mean, and that's interfacing with people that are much better than me at those various, right? Like the best legal minds ever in distribution, the best distributors ever, and just kind of, being a leader and keeping the vision coherent and marketable, because ultimately we're a business and we're trying to make money here at the end of the day. I'm all about art, but keeping an eye on the financials is a big part of what I do as a producer.
It's a wise thing to be focused on as well.
Not everybody is, not in the indie film space, especially.
Yeah. With these different roles, a variety of different things you do, what does the business development for Graham look like? How are you getting such different jobs? And I know we talked a little bit about network earlier, and I'm sure that's a critical component. Mm-hmm. But yeah, how are these different kinds of jobs coming to you? Are you pursuing specific lanes? What does that look like?
You mentioned I've worked for Vice, NBC, TLC, HGTV, Nickelodeon, Netflix, all sorts of various brands off the top of my head. And I think my initial approach to the industry right out of school was become as hireable as possible. And let me break that down a little bit. I was the first one to have a Phantom 1 drone. And like the propellers were flying off, the GoPro was flying off, but I was like there because I wanted to be the DP who also had a drone at the time, even if it was pretty makeshift. Specialized in working on shows with kids, on science shows, on complicated topics. I did a show about the Higgs boson particle at CERN, involving, particle collision and their underground colliders, and trying to explain concepts like the quote unquote God particle to a mass audience is something that I think I'm pretty good at, is talking about the history of the Central Intelligence Agency, which at this point spans over 100 years with the start of the OSS, talking about castles in Europe and making that a coherent story. So I'm good with kind of complicated topics, distilling for a little bit of a wider audience, but not talking down to that same audience. And I love underwater photography. I love, the water in general. So that's another example where I'm kind of specialized in a different area. And I love being the guy on the Zoom call when someone's like, hey, we need a drone, and I raise my hand. Hey, we need to be in the ocean, and I raise my hand. Hey, we need to be in a helicopter, and I raise my hand. Or climbing the side of this mountain, and I've done these things, right? Or filming the Iditarod dog sled race in sub-zero temperatures, or filming at Chernobyl in a radioactive environment. If I have sort of multiple answers to the classic interview question, what kind of, what is a hard challenge that you've overcome? I think we've all had that interview question at one point or another. And if I have like 9 ways to approach that answer, I'm feeling pretty good. So that was a goal for me early on. Have a kind of a non-specialized, varied skill set, but try to execute each of those individual skills at a highest level as possible. So that flies in the face of being the world's best Steadicam op, you know what I mean? And so I think there's something to that too. But for me, I think the reason I was able to continue working during the most recent pandemic, for example, is because my call sheets went from 180 people down to myself and 3 other people. And I would run audio, or I would do something else. And I never had the ego to be like, no, I won't do that. Because also I enjoy kind of all parts of this. I love all of it. Yeah. So there's that part. Just be hireable and try to answer every interview question you can think of in advance. And then there's the healthy word of mouth of it all. And the work-life balance is a thing I always struggle with. I'm definitely raising your hand in those situations. Suddenly you aren't freelance anymore and you have a full-time job, except your tax information looks like you've worked with 105 different companies in a given year. And that's a little bit of a struggle. That's a little bit challenging. So, ultimately, it's being the right guy at the right time and raising your hand in the right moment.
Yeah.
And then I think, treating people with respect and being a somewhat decent a human being is also a huge part of it as well.
So raising your hand and you're talking about being on these Zoom calls and everything, how are you getting in the room? How are you in the conversation in general?
Oh, I went through that thing that we all did where I would apply to a million different places and 3 would pick up the phone. And then of those 3, one of those people would be at the top of their craft maybe, or know someone who is, and is just working constantly over the last decade. But it did go from that to word of mouth, where it's like on this most recent job, the line producer is a good friend of mine, recommends me. The strange thing about that, though, is no matter how many times I'm recommended by someone in some part of the crew, there's still like the first day of school thing where you have to like prove yourself. It's a stranger thing in this industry. It's like, I never worked on this show, but I have, dozens of other credits related to other things.
Yep.
But it's something about this industry where we're like, oh, prove yourself now.
Yeah.
Anyway, so now it's heavily word of mouth,
and
the network is wide enough that I work very consistently with wearing 1 or 2 or all 3 of those various hats that I've mentioned. So it just sort of becomes kind of self-sustaining. And then of course we're in the middle of a strike right now as well. So there's sort of exterior market forces that affect the day-to-day work as well.
In a season like this where it's almost forced hiatus, do you push into your own passion projects? I'm kind of curious, for my career and a lot of other people, specifically in like the cinematography world, passion projects and going filming something for yourself has been sort of what helps level up and get you those jobs. So how have passion projects been a part of your career path? And do you pursue those in a time like this where there is a shutdown?
When the strike happens, and just to timestamp this, we're, I don't know, at least 100 days into it now, at least from the Writers Guild perspective. So IATSE, I'm a member of Local 600, which is a part of IATSE. We went through our own negotiations, contract negotiations, and then we ended up not striking as an organization. And then, of course, the writers came in, and now the Screen Actors Guild came in. And the first thing I did is I reached out to people. I'm like, hey, we should do a music video, or hey, we should do X. And initially it was music videos, because of the things I'm known for, music videos are not one of them. I was like, okay, well, the thing I always loved about music videos is you get to experiment with X vintage lens from 1963 and have people not freak out about it, Yeah, I leaned heavily into passion projects, or I also have this CineD thing, I can be looking at various aspects of technology right now and diving into those. I leaned heavily into that, and I think it kind of forced a few of us to have a good work-life balance in a good way. And the writers and the actors especially, I mean, IATSE, we're in solidarity with those guys, and they have very legitimate grievances. And I hope this all works out for the best, sooner, because my heart really goes out to friends of mine who had maybe 1 writing credit on a CW show, for example. Like they're just breaking in, they're almost there. They've been in a writer's room and as an assistant for like 2 seasons or whatever. That's a precarious time in their career to have something like this happen. So my heart really goes out to specifically those kinds of folks.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like an easy time to kind of navigate that. And I mean, we talked about this a little bit before, but it's been interesting to be on the other side where Hollywood is not a part of what we do. We're kind of in that unique season where you don't really need to be involved with Hollywood to still be producing commercials and ads and different stuff. And so some of that can be separate.
Yeah, commercials are under completely different contracts. So SAG actors can do a commercial right now if they wanted to. So, yeah.
So a slightly different twist. And this is one that I always give permission to say no to. I think one of the biggest things we learn from in life is failure. I'm curious if you have a specific failure in your career that you really learned from and helped you to grow to the place you are now.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, like everyone, I've had my fair share of mistakes and failures. I am trying to work this out in myself, but I have a tendency to look at every single one of my projects and see every little tiny detail that I quote unquote messed up on, and then beating myself up about X thing. So it's hard for me to name one specific thing because you spend so long with these projects that I see tiny details. Maybe some would consider tiny details, but for me, they're like big things where I'm like, we should have done X, we should have done this. And as a result, I don't love watching, sort of my past work. And again, that's not a reflection on all the other great crew members who worked on those projects and I'm sure killed it from their perspective. But I'm a bit hard on myself, and I wish that I could kind of get over that and be comfortable with the place that a product is in. And sometimes it's good that the contract runs out, right? In a sense where it's like or the deadline for airing happens, because I would keep tinkering with a thing way past when I should be. So I don't know. It's something I struggle with. The one thing I'm proud I haven't failed at, I'm going to knock on the table, which is going to shake the whole mic. Here we go. Knock. Right. So the one thing I'm happy I haven't, failed at yet is the safety of my crew. That's the big thing. I think I could live with everything else other than somebody being hurt on my team.
For sure. Yeah.
So that's something that I've thought about a lot. Like even looking back on moments where it's like, should we have done that? Should we have done that? It's like no one got hurt, but doesn't matter. It's one of those things. And filming documentaries, doing a lot of that work. If I'm a little unsure about whatever it is, then I'll do it myself. You know what I mean? Or if I wouldn't do it, then I'm not going to send somebody else to do it. And the industry gets a bad rap for doing that sort of stuff. But I'm very much like producing, directing, DPing from the front line. I'm right there. I'm not going to go somewhere else. We're going to do it together. And then I also will stop the shot. I mean, I'll stop the production if I feel like this is dangerous and not sustainable. And I'm not afraid to speak up about that stuff because, I'm a couple years into this at this point, and I have enough work that I feel fine. And I like to think that wouldn't be the only criteria for speaking up. But I especially now, after Safety for Sarah and all of these very important movements that have happened in our industry, I especially feel safe to speak up. And everybody should,
Yeah.
But that's a set culture thing that we all kind of need to build. And Rust, Elena Hutchins, I mean, another example right there of just what we do is ultimately entertainment. And if the crew is terrified making a thing or scared or uncertain, that comes across in the final piece. So it's beholden to all of us to make it a good working environment, no matter how stressful or how expensive everything is to make.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I appreciate you sharing that. I think most people at least spend some time doing what you were originally saying, which is beating up on yourself for the things that didn't happen or that could have happened or could have made it better, or continuing to tinker. And I think at least most people I know who film look back 3 years at what they filmed and hate it, just because you're always progressing. The more time you spend on a camera, the more you understand it, the better the visuals typically turn out. But we also, like you mentioned earlier with your turf commercial, sometimes we lean into fads and then we look back and just cringe because it wasn't the right fad to lean into, or it didn't fit it
didn't serve the story or serve the project at the time. Yeah. I reconcile this a little bit because I'm like, we're all aiming for 100%, but we need to be okay hitting 88 or 89% or 92%, right?
Yeah,
Like that's kind of how the math has to work. So
for sure. And I think in the creative space, your 92 can still be someone's 10%. Like they could still hate what you've done, even if you've put all this effort into it.
yeah, there's
And
some
so it's-
subjectivity for sure.
You have to be able to at least reconcile for yourself what we were trying to create. And that's one of the benefits of goals for anything is if we achieved our goals, especially in like the creation part, it may not achieve the financial goals. Then you can at least say like, man, I could put my name on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you're saying is, one person's 90% might be someone's 10%. A lot of the role of a producer is managing those expectations so that there isn't that huge differential with what the client thinks or the network or another stakeholder thinks. So
and
that is a big part of it.
10% is more of like the audience, the end viewer, not necessarily someone on the team. Hopefully you don't ever have the 90 and 10% from the director
from somebody on the
or
team.
someone else, because that'd be rough. So a couple more quick questions for you. The one that I think I try to lean into specifically with this podcast is for anyone who's spent some time in something. What would you tell your past self going into your college career or starting in this field, and or someone who is listening to this right now who's 18 coming out of high school, 23 coming out of college and just starting to figure out their career? What do you wish you knew that you know now? Or what's an encouragement that you could give?
I came into both school and my quote unquote normal regular career being pretty, I think, too intense, too focused on hitting 100% all the way through the process, never allowing for anything to be less than 100%. And I think that leads to an on-set dynamic where people feel like they're in combat and they're not making something that's creative. So I would go back and tell myself to be more calm, to be a better, faster collaborator, that you're going to get there. But it took like years of me to get to that place where I was fine with that 191 differential, and not everyone has the same career goals as you or the same ideas about what success and failure look like. And understanding that too is incredibly important. So I think I would tell myself to be less intense. And I think some of that intensity that I'm talking about came out of what we all had, that imposter syndrome coming out of school, where it's like, do I really know this? Can I really do this? Can I call myself a professional at this? And that, like, never cracking a smile on set or whatever came out of probably some imposter syndrome on my part. So yeah, we're incredibly lucky to get to do this. We just have to just be calm, enjoy it, have a good set culture. Why else are we doing it? Because as I referenced earlier, there's just way easier jobs. So that was it. Graham, be less intense. Past Graham.
I love it.
Yeah, 15 years ago, Graham.
I think that's a great insight. And even just being able to kind of look back and see that in yourself. I'm sure that makes you a much better person for what you're doing now. Do you smile on set now?
I try to. People still tell me especially when I'm holding a camera and I'm doing something like very specific, that I look like I want to kill someone. I look too intense when I'm like holding a camera, but I'm like, it is what it is. I'm focusing. I'm sorry. So I still get that note every once in a while from people who know and love me. I hope so.
I want to kind of end on this. It's kind of a 2-part question that is part of one. In this industry, you've been able to work on so many different things. It's what is your dream project now that you would like to accomplish? Like, is there something on your Mount Rushmore of accomplishments that if it were to land on your IMDb page, or just for you personally, that you'd be thrilled? And do you feel like in this career that it's hard to be satisfied with your accomplishments?
There's definitely uh shows that I would love to be involved with that I'm a fan of for whatever reason. I think we all have that. I definitely early on thought, okay, I'm going to make a movie, right? That was the goal for a long time. I'm going to make a feature film. And then I did that and did that a bunch of times, still do that and thought, okay, well this is just kind of another aspect of the work. This isn't the end goal, you know? So I've evolved a little bit on that idea. I do count myself very lucky that I'm able to have a full-time career doing this, which was also the goal for a while, was just being regularly employed and able to help support, my family where I could. So that was a goal for a while. Now I'm in this weird like transitional place where I am a little unsure for the first time in my life where exactly, like what's my 5-year plan, because the idea of quote working on bigger things is a little nebulous. Like, is that the goal? I don't know. So right now I'm in kind of a finding, where I fit is my own personal goal. I worked on a BBC documentary recently, which was fascinating to me and really interesting and was on a topic that I found fascinating. And so that, and I've always been a fan of NASA, and I worked on a project with Smithsonian about the Artemis 1 mission finale, the Orion spacecraft splashing down. So it's like I'm going through the bucket list. I am like working with NASA people for sure, right up at the top. I don't know, because there is something a little terrifying to me about being on like 9 seasons of a thing or 5 seasons or 4, seasons, because I do love coming into a new place, working with a topic for a specific amount of time and then leaving and then going to doing something else. So I don't know. Wasn't a great answer, Greg, but it's any combination of those.
Yeah. So there isn't just one pinnacle thing.
No,
like you've
no.
kind of checked a lot of those
I have
original.
because if people would say, okay, well, is it like a Marvel movie? And the answer on a Marvel movie is you're shooting an eighth of a page if you're lucky a day, and that pace I think would be a little hard for me. I think that pace is hard. I like the pace of faster, or streamer original movies can be all sorts of different things, but like a under 10 million, under 5 million Netflix original has like a certain pace to it. A Shutter original has a certain pace to it that I'm very drawn to, that I think, being second unit on like a car exploding and working on that for multiple days might not pump me up as it might pump other people up. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not sure. I think it's just working with people that I really love working with is currently the goal I'm going after.
And that's a great goal. It leads to a much better day than just doing something because of the name surrounding it.
Yeah. I mean, I've just been so lucky that I've been able to work on like shows like RuPaul spinoffs, to Dimension 20, which is a D&D show. I'm wearing the sweatshirt right now, to, Vice Informer with an anonymous person wearing a mask who's like informing on a specific industry and they need to be anonymous for their own safety, to BBC stuff, so I was on a survival show called the Island with Bear Grylls that, that was its own kind of thing. I kind of did that. I don't need to do another survival show. You know what I mean? I'm like moving through the list. I'm pretty happy right now.
Good place to be. So we'll just kind of end on this. Is there anything, I know you have some NDAs and different things you can't talk about, anything you're currently really excited about that you're working on that you'd want other people to check out? Or
I'm really excited to be doing Nick News for Nickelodeon season 3 of the reboot as a director of photography, because it's like a kid focus and it's just so much fun. And, we're not like 60 Minutes. We're not out there, surveying the earthquake damage or whatever. So it has a kid, vibe to it, which I really respond to. So right now I'm really enjoying that. And it's been definitely a bit of a morale boost because I was doing some pretty intense subjects for Vice, for example. So being able to work on the reboot of Nick News because it ran for 17 seasons. So to be clear, this is season 3 of the reboot. Has just been absolutely fantastic.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so grateful that you had come on this with us, kind of talk through some of these different things and give a different viewpoint than we've had so far with just having these different roles and hats, and showing some of that jack of all trades is okay and leads to some great opportunities. And I just really appreciate it. So thank you for being on.
Thank you, Greg. Good to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for watching the Video Creator Podcast today. I hope that it was helpful and that this interview really helps you grow in your career. We'll see you next time.